is probably going to be too long for this kind of setting, so I was going to get your card. But if you could just say a bit about, we're talking about looking at a whole entire community, Somerville, this entire city. We talk about communities, but there are communities within communities, right, who want different things. So as you were looking at your surveys and focus groups, how did you define the community? How did you kind of make the decisions you made based on the information that you have?
I'll be brief for now and then I'll follow up with you. But I mean, to be honest, and I like to have a healthy dose of honesty in these kinds of situations, even when it doesn't always feel as great. Is that, you know, when we were in the moment, and I speak as someone who was not there at the very outset. I started about 2.5 years ago, almost 3 years ago now. So I'm a little new, but at the outset, the focus was really on the geographic community of Winter Hill, and understanding that the Mystic projects as a subset of that geography were especially isolated as kind of the farthest out part from Broadway as the main thoroughfare through the area, as well as economically, in addition to physically, removed from that kind of main strip where any small food retailers would be, as well as issues with other grocery stores, etc. And then as you expand, a lot of it, I think, came from really focus group style or conversation based. And so we started the Mystic. The next place that made the most sense, of course, was the other housing projects, which is on the opposite side of Somerville. And there used to be a Johnny's Food Master there that then turned into the Whole Foods, or yeah, there's a Whole Foods down there, and then there's also a new Stop and Shop over there, which is a more recent development. So at the time, some questions about where to park. But I think as we move forward, you know, it became talking with the seniors of the senior center on a fixed income, and speaking of local food and the debate between local and non-local procurement, which is one that we have in the office all the time. But that senior farmers market coupons are a really big lifeline for the seniors that we serve, as well as for our business model that those are only usable on local foods, and so we've so far kind of kept on that for this reason. But we find that our customers kind of fall into self-select in some way into these smaller markets. A lot of our customers at North Street, for example, mostly Haitian and looking for some of the specific vegetables that we source that you can't find at the Stop and Shop or at the other stores. We have a lot of older women, kind of the matriarch groups, who are cooking traditional foods for their families, which is another kind of interesting sub-community that we didn't necessarily do the, you know, we're looking for this subgroup of women, of immigrant women who are taking care of children or anything of that nature, but kind of came to us with what we provide at the market. And so some of it I think we've come upon by chance and by just trying to offer the right things. And then as we move forward, as you mentioned in the bio, which was great, we're doing a comprehensive food assessment in Somerville, trying to understand where the gaps in access are in a variety of ways, from retail to emergency, institutional food of all sorts, and kind of also the non-traditional foodways, I guess. So I think that'll give us a lot more answers, structured, data-driven answers moving forward of what sub-communities need what, rather than kind of seeing how it emerges organically, which I think is more in the past. Sorry, that was long.
Let's open it up.
Well, I applaud all of you for being entrepreneurs. I started a business about 25 years ago, and I'm retired about 10 years ago. Started with 2 people, ended up with 100 people, manufacturing business. And I remember going into business and saying, oh, I'm going to make a lot of money in like 2 years, not even retired. It took 25 years. So my question is, you're all entrepreneurs, even though, you know, you maybe the different organizations are non-profit or for-profit. What is your idea, or what are your business plans for the future? Where do you see, if you could guess right now, how long would it take for this to be scalable? Because these are all very small businesses right now. And are they scalable? And how long do you really think it's going to take? As I said, I thought it was going to take 2 years, and it took 20 years.
Yeah, so on our side too, we certainly believe it's scalable too. I mean, again too, with us being health focused, you know, we're observing right now this macro shift in healthcare where we're shifting towards value-based models. And so that's creating sort of the development context for groups like us to come in as a preventative healthcare intervention and then leverage. We only spend about 50% of our health outcomes are from our a result of behavior in our built environment. We only spend 4% of our total healthcare budget on that. And so as we shift towards value-based models, that's going to expand. That 4% is going to expand. And so we're really attempting to position ourselves as an integrated solution to help contain healthcare costs. And even as a nonprofit, we're really looking at our business model as being B2B, especially through Food RX, where we're going to be able to really just shift the way that we think about food, but also healthcare, where we're using food as a measure of preventative healthcare and then offsetting the costs for low-income families by tapping into the healthcare sector. And our model for growth really too, as opposed to continuing to develop different versions of Fresh Start in different regional locations, we recognize that even in Worcester, even in Somerville, the regional supply chain out there is way different than it is in Boston, and stakeholders are different, the existing infrastructure is different. So I don't think too we're going to attempt to scale up our direct operations. We're really working hard this year to develop a strong architectural blueprint and a business plan that we can open source to help, as a permanent in California, develop capacity for a mobile market. And then we're also working on a food prescription platform that's going to sort of connect the value chain of insurance companies, providers, and patients, and then retailers outside of Fresh Truck to be able to develop a transaction engine that can streamline underwriting the cost of food, and then we'll create a data set around what people are actually buying, and then automate the process of tracking that against health outcomes. And as soon as we can prove too that food is shifting the way that people are shifting health outcomes too, I think, again, that's, as long as you're making money too for the healthcare sector, then you keep investing. So that's us.
I'll be much quicker than last time. But, listening to what you were saying about local businesses and local entrepreneurship, I mean, I guess the worst entrepreneur ever, because I don't want to be in business. We want to work ourselves out of a job. We want to have a food landscape that has the things that we are providing. It has what people need and what people want, which can be two separate things, but two very important things. And that we are not necessarily the ones to be providing it. Like, we are not, there again with that pesky honesty thing, but we are not a sustainable business. Our revenue can only support buying the produce that we need for the next weeks. It doesn't support our staff. We don't make enough money to be able to do that. We don't have a profit. But that's also not our goal. We're a city service, we're a municipal service to our constituents and to our shoppers. And so what I hope would be next for us, and this food assessment that we're doing will hopefully give us more insight into that, is to support existing local businesses, our small food retailers that are already here, that people are already, for a lot of different types of items, are already shopping at for a lot of their food needs, but that some of the produce is not up to par with some of the other grocery stores, what they come to expect when they're shopping for produce, or also, matching what we can get at the farmer's market with our connections. And so trying to be able to transfer that over to them to say, you live here, you work here, let's continue to bolster your business. And eventually we kind of fade out, and that Somerville and Winter Hill, but all the other, and East Somerville, all the other areas just become places that have healthy, accessible food in equitable fashion at good prices, and the foods that people want to be eating. We know that our customers want these things. They look at it all the time. They tell us how to cook it. We don't even do recipes anymore. It's like, you tell us, because they tell us all the time, and we just kind of help distribute it and connect them up to others. But so we want to work ourselves out of this.
Yeah, we hope that we're creating a model that can be replicated in other cities and want to be open and share that information, and do get calls on a regular basis from people in other cities trying to start something similar. I think in terms of growth, I hope that we're able to go deeper as a company in terms of serving our customers and serving our employees. How can we get our company to pay a living wage? How do we offer healthier, even healthier options like green juice at our cafe? And so I think that will take time before we can reach that point and we can be truly profitable in that sense.
So at this stage, we are a project. I'm a project manager. And so we do have a fiscal sponsor. We are able to get donations and also funding through grants and such. So at present, we are not sustainable because we're just a project. I'm also working myself out of a job. When I move the project along to the point in which we're building a store, and the store is operating, there'll be a GM in my slot, and I'll be looking for work. So, but the business model is, while the structure is different in terms of being a co-op and having these multiple stakeholders, the business model is ultimately the same as any other grocery store. It is challenging. Grocery store business is difficult. Margins are thin, but our pro forma certainly is built like any other. We are actually paying more for the worker owners, but ultimately in terms of the merchandising and all of that, that looks like any other traditional grocery store. So the funding is an important piece, certainly, as with any business. There's only so much debt that we can take out. Ultimately, we have to service that debt. The way the pro forma is running right now, our debt coverage is good and is on track in the first 2 years. Break even is looking a little bit further down the line, but in terms of servicing our debt, being able to pay our bills, having enough cash flow and all that, that's all working out quite well. So while we're taking on some debt, we also have to make sure that we're funding through some equity. So we did have a direct public offering, which was offered to anybody in Massachusetts who was interested in investing. And I can talk about this, a lot of minutiae there, but ultimately what's important about that is that sourcing some money with equity as opposed to all debt also makes the thing work and viable as opposed to, again, too much debt, and ultimately the model won't work out. Wouldn't work at all.
My name is Cassandra Campbell. I'm faculty at Roxbury Community College and also a neighbor of Northeastern University and alumni and mother and everything of Northeastern University. So I am growing food here, but finding seeds from my country or other country, the food we like, is very difficult to find it. So where your summer baby grow at the farm, they get their seeds?
That's a great question. So I unfortunately don't have as much of a connection to like the growing of the food, but I would definitely recommend getting in contact with Groundwork Somerville, because they're the ones that are the experts on growing these different types of produce and figuring out how to do it in this climate, as well as World Farmers. They're amazing, and a really large operation. And then I mean, the other place that I think of all the time is Frank Mangan, out of UMass.
Extension.
Yeah, Extension, out west that way. Yes, and his World Crops website, which is like an encyclopedia that I try and look at often of different types of produce, as well as how it can be grown within the Massachusetts climate, which is often some different. So I'm sorry I don't have like a really a solid answer of a source, but I think that those three sources would find definitely what you're looking for.
Okay. I have another question for Roxbury Fresh Food Generation, because we are having food crisis or food problem in our neighborhood, but our college, did you try to contact with them, or what is the status?
The food truck has been at Roxbury Community College a couple of times.
Once or twice, I think.
Once or twice for our events. We would like to be there on a regular basis. We have had conversations, and I don't.
With whom?
I can't remember it off the top of my head, but it's something that we would definitely love to explore and make happen as business owners and as small business owners, which we sort of push, but we can only push so far before having to get back to our business.
Do you have any menu or anything you
We have a website with a full menu and contact information, and I'd be happy to talk after.
My question is for Fresh Food Generation. So you said that you had to end up partnering with nonprofits to like succeed as a venture. Could you just explain that more, and what exactly did that entail?
Yeah, so nonprofits and public agencies and even co-ops. So we have found that our catering service in particular is very useful to nonprofits focused on health. Because when they have events, you just don't want to show up with raw fruits and vegetables. You want it cooked. So then who do you go to cook it? There aren't many caterers in Boston that are doing Latin American, Caribbean food with a mission focus. There actually aren't any. So it was, I would say, a relief to a lot of the nonprofits that we work with that we were in the market and they weren't having to order from all one hand. And to give an example, this was true a year ago, I don't know if it's still true, but we were one of 3 approved caterers on Boston Public Health Commission's list. So that has allowed us to do a lot of community events and get our food out to people when we otherwise would not have been able to. So they have the money, they have the ability to do some of the creative things that these guys do in terms of education and teaching people about healthy food, and then we can show up and piggyback onto that.
Thank you. Jess, it's the same thing. It's sort of the connection to the health center system. And how does that play out?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a B2B business model too, where the Health Commission too is pre-purchasing food from Fresh Food Generation too, and they do it with us as well. You know, there's a community of stakeholders that are really interested in sourcing healthy food, and those stakeholders care about the same families that we do, but it's just tapping into them. I mean, it's a business development strategy to tap into the community of stakeholders that care about health. Yeah.
Hi, thank you very much to the 4 of you. I really loved your presentations. I'm a professor here and I teach a class on food policies and non-environmental health. So my question is for you, Josh. I'd like for you to expand a little more on the food prescription program because I thought it was very interesting. But I didn't grasp what you were talking about when you were explaining it, and I think that it's very, very interesting.
Sure. So it's a subscription where healthcare providers can essentially pre-purchase gift cards from us. I got one here. just like this.
Okay.
So it's a $10 one, and they can give that out to their patient population to come and shop in the truck. So we have a weekly market at the South End Health Center every Friday. And every single Friday, a patient can go into the health center. They get a $5 one of these, and they can use it to shop in the truck just like a gift card. We're actually scaling that up through a digital platform. So this will act like a smart gift card, and it will actually, the platform will allow a doctor to custom build a shopping list specific to a patient's dietary health profile. So that a patient can come on the truck and it will work just like a coupon. And we're working on this outside of Fresh Truck as well too. So if you're going to a grocery store and you're buying, maybe some food that's not so good, then you're buying like, the kale that's on your shopping list, it'll just draw down the cost of your kale. And we're feeding that transactional data back into a patient's EMR. So doctors can start looking at health outcomes alongside of transactional data. It's just been pre-purchased gift cards. That's the main thing.
How's it funded?
Healthcare providers.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like healthcare providers, insurance companies, but also governmental agencies, social service agencies. They just pre-purchase gift cards from us. Yeah.
Quick question for Darnell. I imagine you could talk about this for an hour, but your question was, who owns the food system? And however you want to approach that question, kind of go.
Oh dear.
Choose the faculty member asked that question.
Whoa.
Or we situate within the life of the co-op, the world of the co-op. Maybe put a box around it. Think about the food system as the co-op's sort of position in that.
I was thinking more generally, but
I know you were thinking more generally, which is what has me like, oh boy, where do I start and how do I not start? Stomping around and screaming and using words that, yeah. Okay. Well, generally speaking, we don't own the food system. The people who are in this room don't own it. Certainly the people who are most affected by the fact that it's broken don't own it. The majority of people who are living in underserved communities certainly do not own it. To think that the marketplace is going to, on its own, fix inequities, I think is, I'm unclear where that story has come from, but I certainly have certainly not seen it. There is a place for all of us here. Nonprofits, for-profits, governmental agencies who are deeply interested in the health and wealth of the community at large to think differently. But there is a place for ownership, certainly. While we're all living in this economic system, I think there has to be some thought about that. We are for-profit. Again, we have this sponsor now because we don't have a store, but we want to be a business with mission that is viable and scalable as a way to start thinking about, at least in the end, in terms of retail, that communities can own the business. But you have to look all around. Who's growing your food? Who's storing your food? Who's transporting your food? All of that. And to the extent that any of us have models that are scalable that can start really thinking about putting that in the hands of the community at large, the better off we're all going to be.
Anybody else want to tackle that before one?
Not to tackle, to give an example of, in addition to the co-op of what that kind of the opposite looks like, is that, Somerville residents and Winter Hill residents don't choose if the grocery store is here. There's a formula that grocery stores use to determine if it's viable, if it's feasible, if the community is simply not wealthy enough to make the grocery store, make enough money, but they want to, from all the way up there down to who chooses where things are stocked in the store, who buys the prime shelf space, and all the way from where the groceries are to where grocery stores are to where the groceries on her shelf are bought by other people. And so I deeply appreciate your commentary. I can't help it. It's on my phone. It makes me so mad. Another thing is that if you start looking at prices for like certain products, say Stop and Shop in West Roxbury, where I live, say Stop and Shop in Somerville, maybe in any number of places, you'd be surprised how much more expensive it is in say like a Grove Hall. Like your milk is more expensive based on where you live, and it's not about how much money you have in your pocket. As a matter of fact, if you have less money in your pocket, it's probably more expensive.
Property tax.
No, I'm sorry, property tax. Yeah, absolutely. So, this one it makes me so mad. I can speak for an hour, but co-ops don't leave their neighborhood to move to the place where they're going to make more money. That doesn't happen because the community owns the store. They don't move the store. So, again, it's still a business and it has to be viable. But beyond that, all that, the triple bottom line is a thing. And that what's viable, then who owns it, who's making the decisions about what's put on the store shelves, what products are there, how much they cost, all of those things. I say put it in the hands of the community if you can.
Yeah, I think this is a question that I think about a lot. When we first started, we were at a conference with Mel King, and he said, we're at war with Tony the Tiger. In a lot of ways, I think that we don't even own our own taste buds. A lot of people don't have the opportunity to. They're marketed to at a very young age. And then you start eating foods that are engineered and designed to be addictive, that you don't even crave natural, healthy foods. So I think in a lot of ways the food system has been hijacked by corporations who are primarily concerned about nonprofits, and not only have they taken ownership of the food system, but they've taken ownership of our taste buds, our interest in food. So I think that things can change, and McDonald's has started to realize that they need to change their game or they're going to go out of business. So I do think that we have the ability to take ownership again.
Hi, thank you so much all for coming to speak. Every time you guys open your mouth and say something else, I'm like even more speechless. So,
yeah.
Okay, so I have two questions. One question is for Josh. How hard was it to get healthcare companies to provide food subscriptions? Or was that something that had already been done? Was that something that you guys had really pushed for? And my second question is for Darnell, so you can speak for another hour. So I had no idea that there were so many different types of co-ops, and the co-op model seems like it would be an economic incentive for companies as we see more of a consumer demand for people to have a connection to where they're spending their money. Do you see more businesses in the food industry turning to the co-op model? Thank you.
It's not hard. It wasn't hard at first to get it started too, because nutritionists get it and like doctors get it. They're on the front lines. The challenge now is for us to convince major institutional healthcare providers that it's a good idea. And the tough part, we all instinctively know that if food is foundational to our health, the trick is really going to be to prove in the data that our prescription program, Fresh Start, as a healthcare intervention, is actually shifting health outcomes and saving them money. So yes and no. It was easy to get started. It was easy to get a nutritionist to buy in. But we got to work really, really hard to get institutional healthcare providers to make it sustainable. Because we can't rely on nutritionists to sort of hustle up grant funding. It's got to become like a deeply integrated part of healthcare too. So I'll get back to you and let you know how that goes.
That's a fascinating question. Wow. So I think there are a couple things going on, right? I think there's the tough food, kind of atmosphere, which is there is a drive to get kind of bigger stores and more volume, and drive down prices, and that kind of like that model, right? The bigger the better, which is typically not the co-op model to start. I mean, you do have stores that are successful and are expanding and have different stores, which is fantastic. But there was a shift, certainly, in consumer, I think consumer knowledge and behavior and kind of feelings of disillusionment in terms of the typical marketplace. I mean, it's not food only, but across the board. The crash, the economic crash, and all of the destruction that it caused in people's lives. It ended up with people really thinking about institutions, banks, that type of thing, and ownership. And my understanding is, actually, Maggie's here from the Co-op London New England, so she might be able to talk about that. That there was a renewed interest in across sectors, including food, in the co-op model, and that you have many more startup co-ops now than you have in recent memory, due to the fact that people are really looking at economic control and also food sourcing, but economic control as a means to, again, taking back some of what we've given away in terms of control and ownership for goods and services.
My question is for Darnell as well. So I actually worked for one of those co-ops that you mentioned. I didn't even know the history of co-ops being primarily led by women or by people of color. So I was kind of wondering why you think that co-ops have taken on this image of being hippy-dippy, $10 artisanal eggs. Why do you think that's happened over time?
Wow, you guys are giving me a drink. Someone needs to buy me a beer after this. It's a tough question. Okay, well, I think it's about who owns the stories. The people with the platform and able to, who the platform, the ability to tell their story to a large audience ultimately owns the history. Should I just leave it at that?
That's a really good answer.
Because no one else had one. Is REI a co-op success or failure then? I mean, I know it's successful, but and maybe point over to her, but you know what I mean? I paid $20 once and I get 1% back on the expensive camping gear I buy. But is that what a co-op looks like as a benefit to community or society, or is that just a marketing ploy? Not legally.
Huh. Well, I'm no expert in REI, so I probably can't speak to that. And do I think it's a marketing ploy? I don't think so. But I think that, so for instance, I showed all those slides about who owns co-ops, and I didn't want to get into the minutia of surpluses are kind of distributed, what the dividend is, and how it's kind of distributed. But it does matter. I think in terms of having a really large co-op, like a consumer co-op, you are going to get pennies back on your dollar, right? But there are other benefits to that model. In our case, for instance, the way our bylaws are written, the consumer owners and the worker owners actually split the dividends. That means that the worker owners are actually, by right, are going to get a lot more money than consumer owners. And just kind of a little bit of how that breaks out. The worker owners would be given a certain percentage based on the amount of hours worked, while the consumer owners will be getting a certain amount back based on the goods that they purchase. We made that decision. Because we thought that it was really important that the workers are actually being paid as well as we possibly can pay them in an industry that often does not pay that well. That if you have a model of 1,000 member owners, 1,500 member owners or more, you're always going to have a smaller amount back. But still, consumer owners are the ones who are running for the board, voting for the board, actually stating the things that matter to them. Kicking the board, we kind of honestly voting the board out if they're not actually doing what they say that is important to the mission and the vision of the organization. So I think there's a lot of ways to actually look at success. The model itself also, again, co-ops are really sticky. Like they form and they stay, they're lasting, they absorb a lot of these really difficult times in kind of economic booms and busts. So it may not be all about what you get back at the end of your year, but it might be a larger picture of like sustainability that other businesses don't have.
Okay, Sophie, okay, then over there. Joe, you go ahead.
A question for Josh. Could you talk at some length, or as much length as you want, about the Kaiser Permanente initiative that you mentioned briefly, and how widely do you think that effort can be?
There's no initiative. That was just an example. We're just looking at a consulting vertical as being like our growth methodology too. So as opposed to developing, a new executive director and our own regional, like from the ground up, building infrastructure out in California to develop a fresh truck mobile market, we would just deliver them an architectural blueprint of the truck, because we're spending a lot of time really nailing that down from like customer experience to refrigeration. So you're working in a really small space, so optimizing for storage versus what's on display, and then it's got to be you got to be able to transport it. It's got to be able to open and close quickly too. We service like 3 to 4 locations a day, so delivering that architectural blueprint as well as the business plan, and then providing sort of strategic technical support to get them up and running. But the overall model too is to develop something that we could just sort of out of the box help Kaiser develop their own integrated global market model, as opposed to attempting to build it for ourselves from the ground up. Yeah. That's much.
Okay, my question is a follow-up question to Josh. So what we were saying at the end about proving to healthcare companies that providing fresh fruits and vegetable is going to be saving them the money in the long run. So Fresh Truck was created, let me know if I get this wrong, but created to solve the food justice issue in communities that might have lower socioeconomics. I also think that the food justice issue is across all socioeconomic factors. And I don't remember who was saying it's like a war against Tony the Tiger. And so do you see the food the prescriptions going into in the yearly checkups for kids? Because even parents of I nanny a lot, and there's a nanny for kids that are very well off, sometimes doctors, but a lot of the food they buy is very processed. No idea of, sometimes they go by the national guidelines of have like half a cup of this or half a cup of that, but everything else will be processed meats and vegetables. So where do you see in that?
Yeah, so I guess to sort of delineate too, so we think FoodRx is something too that was inspired by Fresh Truck, but spun out of Fresh Truck to become its own standalone. That's a tech measure in and of itself, and it certainly scales outside of Fresh Truck. And I think you're right. I mean, our healthcare, we know that diet-related health issues disproportionately impact low-income communities of color, and that's where Fresh Truck is focused. And Fresh Truck too is sort of a logistics, distribution, and retail model specifically for those communities that we know where there's no development context for a grocery store. Because we all talked about it. There's market failure. Grocery stores don't work in every neighborhood. Private sector isn't going to do it. So that's where sort of Fresh Truck plugs in. The FoodRx platform certainly does apply to it's more scalable, right? It's a tech platform too that just needs to be adopted by a doctor. You're right, yeah, I mean, I think the use case too is like, you know, if you think about like chemotherapy, ARVs, diabetes, Crohn's disease, but, you know, eye health, dental health, $956 billion worth of healthcare expenses too. And I mean, the number one cause of chronic pain is food, like, because people are overweight too, so their body hurts. But $956 billion is attributed to our healthcare expenses as a result of diet-related health issues too. So that's you know, we're trying to tackle a much bigger scale and scope of demographics too, with FoodRx and that platform too outside of Fresh Up.
My question was for Cassandra. You talked about how your business model kind of had to change as you went along. So now you've got the truck and the catering and the cafe. And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about where you see that going and your reasons, maybe if you're going to shift away from one of those prongs, or for the time being, you know, they all work together well. If you could just talk about kind of the integration of them and some plans for the future.
Yeah, so we are actually in the process of growing our catering business because that generates the most revenue. It wasn't why we originally started, right? It was food access in low-income neighborhoods. But to address the previous question, access to local healthy food is something that everyone needs across demographics and across income. So we have really gotten to enjoy filling that market niche in the catering world, whether we're downtown Boston or we're working with a nonprofit in Roxbury. However, for us as a business, the way that we can best serve our customers in low-income neighborhoods and we can best serve our employees is to be financially sustainable. So we are moving in the direction of growing the most profitable piece of our business first. My business partner always jokes, let's start a catering company and then open up a cafe in a low-income neighborhood. We did the opposite. So working on being financially sustainable, profitable, so that we can go deep into the mission work that we do and provide the best services.
Well, Josh will run off, but I'll take it back in a second. First of all, again, I thank our guests for their presentations and the responses and comments. On food is that at the end of the day, the conversations tonight really highlighted is it's never really all about food. It's really about the underlying dynamics of society, its economy, its culture, its way of thinking. And, you know, and obviously, you know, we don't ask, as I was telling my students earlier, we were talking about this earlier in our discussion group, you know, we don't ask Stop and Shop to be democratic or responsive or accountable. You know, we layer a lot of hopes and expectations on these smaller operations that are trying to plug these gaps and meet these needs. So I find it fascinating that, you know, the combination of last week's discussion on the Boston Public Market, for example, and this week, you know, the sort of all these discussions, all these hopes, dreams, small operations that are trying to plug gaps in the food system that, as it evolved over the last half of the 20th century, became increasingly remote, disconnected, undemocratic. And now, co-op may be the best example, but not the only one, of trying to reclaim, perhaps, an older model of what, not food, but not just food, what community needs, what ownership needs, what democracy needs. So, again, no pressure. You know. Thanks a lot. I think it's been a fascinating couple of weeks on this focus on local, regional. Next week, food waste. Also connected to these issues. So again, thanks a lot, everybody. See you next week.